In 1996, Capcom defined an entire subgenre with a game that would permanently set the standard for horror in video games. At this point, Capcom knew they were sitting on top of a gold mine, and as one would expect, a sequel was well on the way. Fast forward 2 years later, in 1998, Resident Evil 2 hit the scene, a game which is widely considered as the gold standard in survival horror. It kept all the elements that made the first game enjoyable, but also pushed the envelope with graphical enhancements, more fleshed out characters, and an amazingly compelling storyline. Now, the question on the table is, where would the series go from here? 3D gaming was no longer in its infancy, it was already evolving. In 1999, the industry was beginning the start of its transition to the next console generation. And because of this, the concept for a third Resident Evil had begun. Taking place after the events of Resident Evil 2, following Claire Redfield in her pursuit to find her brother Chris. Sound familiar? That's right. This concept would later be finalized as Resident Evil Code Veronica. However, as things came into fruition, Code Veronica did not end up becoming the third installment. Although most of the available information on the subject is kinda hazy, it's to my understanding that Sony wanted the development team to put out one final entry on the PlayStation before moving ahead with the Dreamcast. And as a result of that, we got Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. The concept for Nemesis was originally intended as a spin-off game, but ended up becoming the official third installment, making these 3 games a nice and neatly wrapped up trilogy, all of which released on the PlayStation. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, I've already talked about the first and second Resident Evil. Now we're going to dive in and talk about Resident Evil 3. Grab a seat and make yourself comfortable. And if you're already sitting before I said that, then how dare you? No, I'm just kidding. But when I first played this game, I did not know as much about the series as I do now. I knew nothing about the backstory behind the development, and I was only familiar with the first and second game. The first Resident Evil was a game I did not set my expectations high for, but then once I played it, I ended up falling in love with it. The second Resident Evil was a game I did set my expectations high for, and it ultimately met them, but my expectations for the third game lied somewhere in the middle. I think it's a safe assumption that it's probably not as popular as the second game, and on top of that, I made the mistake of listening to my buddy Hunter, who told me it was a poorly received financial flop. So it basically lowered my expectations. But then I spoke to some other people who said that Resident Evil 3 was their favorite game in the series. So now, with all these mixed comments, I was getting curious. The game itself was released in 1999, only 1 year after Resident Evil 2, which means that they had a shorter time frame to work with. And not to mention, this also bought them time to continue working on Code V, which, as I mentioned before, was intended as the true third game, quote-unquote. Now, when you factor in these two pieces of information, the odds seem to be against Resident Evil 3 being a worthy champion. The short time involved with the game's production only shows when it comes to the visuals. One of the biggest improvements 2 had over 1 was from a visual standpoint. However, in the case of Resident Evil 3, it looks more or less identical to 2. However, I do have to say that Resident Evil 3 has the best looking cutscenes I think I've ever seen on the OG PlayStation. That's probably one area where I feel like it is graphically a step up from the second game. I honestly didn't know that the OG PlayStation was capable of producing cinematic visuals that looked this good. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed that this was on PS2 or Xbox. In the span of 3 years, we sure came a long way from this. The storyline in Resident Evil 3 is unique in the sense that it takes place both before and after the events of Resident Evil 2, making it a prequel and a sequel. Jill Valentine makes her big comeback as the starring character, and this game definitely reinvented her. While the first game portrays her as an ordinary special trained operative, this one portrays her as a badass action star, dodging explosives and showing off all these cool moves and tricks. And that brings us to one of the game's main perks. It introduced new abilities that improved the controls and enhanced the overall experience. As far as I'm concerned, the greatest thing this game introduced by far was the fact that you could perform a quick 180-degree turn by holding down the D-pad and pressing square. This was a total game changer for me. In the previous 2 games, no such thing existed. Instead, you had to painstakingly turn your ass around like steering an actual tank. It was time-consuming, and it also made you vulnerable. No matter how fast your reflexes were, you were rarely allowed to actually use them because you were so limited. But in Resident Evil 3, you can actually put your reflexes to use. On top of the quick turn, you also have the option to dodge opponents and counterattack them, which again is a major improvement. Having these new abilities opens up a window of opportunity where you can play using different tactics. No longer do you have to abide by the rules of the old control scheme. This game puts you in a position where you have more control over the character you play as. And another thing that this game did that I don't hear people talk about very often is the fact that you could finally walk up and down the stairs, whereas the first two games you had to press the action button. Another feature this game introduced is the fact that you could finally skip the cutscenes. Not that I don't like the cutscenes, but I at least like to have the option to skip them if I want to, especially if I don't want to sit through the same cutscene more than once. And another concept that this game introduced was ammo crafting. At first, I thought this idea was a little daunting, and I thought it was going to become a hassle, but surprisingly, it ended up becoming one of my favorite aspects of the game. Now, as far as the visuals go, I wouldn't call it a step up or a step down from Resident Evil 2. I'd say they probably run neck and neck. The pre-rendered backgrounds look just as awesome as ever, but one noticeable difference I see in this game is that they actually make the dead bodies a part of the pre-rendered backgrounds, which I'm pretty sure they didn't do in the second game. In the second game, if you saw a dead body, they would appear as the same texture as the in-game characters, but in Resident Evil 3 they appear as part of the background, and from an artistic standpoint, I actually think that looks better. Like I said before, this game is a prequel and a sequel. The first half takes place before the events of Resident Evil 2, and you actually get to visit the police station again. This is supposed to be before Claire and Leon arrive, but the one thing that doesn't make sense to me is that from the looks of it, you would think that this takes place after Leon and Claire explore it. The reason being that most of the doors and windows are boarded shut, as if someone was already using the place for shelter. During my live stream, it confused the shit out of me because I was already convinced that this was taking place after the second game, but then the people in my chat were telling me that this was taking place before. Because, I mean, think about it logically. This would mean that someone had to have removed all those wooden planks from the doors before Leon and Claire arrived, which just doesn't make sense to me. Well, Bernana did say it was earlier, but, I mean, you look at this place, the doors are all, like, blocked, and he's just sleeping. I mean, this place wouldn't have been on lockdown before Leon started his first day of work. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I'm going to take a guess, then I'm going to assume that the reason why the doors are boarded shut is because the developers didn't want you to explore the entire police station again because it would have chewed through ROM data. But here's an idea. Why not just simply lock the doors that you don't want the players going into? One thing that annoyed the shit out of me when I first played this game was the fact that you come across this girl running away from the zombies. And every time I tried catching up with her, I can never make it in time and she ends up being killed. The game falsely leads you into thinking you can save her, and like I said, when I first played this game, I didn't know any better, so I'm pretty sure I spent nearly an entire hour replaying the same part over and over again, trying to bypass all the zombies and catch up with her, but it made no difference. Finally, I gave up and looked it up online, and from what I read, you cannot save her. I was pissed off because then it's like, what's even the point of adding this part? They should have made it so you can save her and maybe have a cutscene where she thanks you, and perhaps the game could have rewarded you in some way. One area I find this game to be a step up from the others is the array of enemies. The zombies, for one, look much scarier than they did in the previous games. I like how it looks like their skin and flesh has been ripped off and almost melted away. Much like the second game, the zombies here attack in large numbers, and in this game, the zombies move a hell of a lot faster, and they can catch up to you easier. Oh no, look, he's catching up to me, he's catching up to me. But oh wait, look at that, naha, 180 bitch. Another thing I love in this game is the way Jill screams.
No!
What the hell is that?
No!
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 I also love the expression on her face in the cutscenes. Like, I know she's supposed to look horrified, but to me, she looks like she's pleasantly surprised about something. Like, not only does she admire the length, but also the girth. Don't worry, I'll show myself out. As you progress further and further, you'll encounter the same stockpile of enemies from the previous games. The dogs, the crows, and the spiders all return, but you also have to fight these assholes that crawl in the wall. At first, I thought they were the chimeras you fought from the first game, but apparently these are a new species. They're a combination of brain suckers and drain demos. You know what? I'm just gonna call them brain suckers, just because I don't want to pronounce that shit, and they basically look the same. All I'm gonna tell you is if you're the type of person who's prone to breaking your controller out of frustration, then you better make sure you use a controller you don't care about when you face these guys. They will fuck you up, and they'll do it in a way that incites every fragment of rage within you. Jill, do you like dealing with these guys?
No!
Oh, see, even she agrees. And even though these aren't the chimeras from the first game, they did happen to bring someone else back from the first game, and that brings us to my #1 favorite part. Are you ready? Alright, here it comes. Shh, 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 shh. Alright, quiet. It's time to be quiet. Shh, shh, shh. Alright, you ready? Swear to God, you better be fucking ready. Alright? Shh, shh, shh. They brought back the hunters, and it's about time. No more stupid lickers. And yeah, I know, I may have pissed off some of my viewers by saying that, but let's face it, the lickers didn't present the same level of challenge that the hunters brought. And on top of that, they introduced 2 new variants of hunters that we've never seen before. And something about the inclusion of the hunters makes this game feel complete to me. Anyway, guys, I'm pretty sure that those are all the enemies that are worth talking about, right? I don't think I missed anything. Therefore, I think it's time to wrap it up. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Wait, am I not done here? Let's ask Jill and see what she thinks. Jill, am I done with this video?
No!
No? Stars. That's right. Now it's time to cover the game's main attraction. Because let's face it, as much as we all love Jill, she is not the main star of this game. Excuse the pun. The main star of this game is mentioned in the title and shown on the front cover, and that, my friends, is Nemesis. And you may ask, who is Nemesis? Well, remember Mr. X from Resident Evil 2? Nemesis is basically Mr. X on steroids. His main objective is to exterminate all the remaining STARS members from the first game. The parts where you encounter him are what define this game, and when that fucker starts coming after you, your heart starts racing. That much I can guarantee. He moves extraordinarily fast, and it's not one of those situations where it's there for cinematic effect. No, he will catch up to you if you don't move your ass. And if you're a split second too slow, he will hit you. Another thing that this guy is pretty much famous for is ruining people's save progress. One common rookie mistake that I've made, and I know other people have made, is to try and go for a long stretch of time without saving, and what ends up happening is Nemesis will show up out of nowhere and kill you and eliminate all of your progress. Just remember, when he shows up, your odds of death are already increased. Therefore, the biggest piece of advice I can give is to save your progress on a frequent basis. The game already gives you a ton of ink ribbons, so you really have nothing to worry about in that sense. The problem with me, though, is I have a tendency of being a little cocky, and what ends up happening is I try to challenge myself by trying to see how far I can make it without saving. But the problem is that unless you're an expert or a speedrunner, it probably isn't a wise choice. All throughout the game, Nemesis stalks you. Most of the time, if you can get out of there fast enough, you can escape him. Of course, you could also choose to stay and fight him, but if you do, then all I'm gonna say is have fun. The earlier you choose to fight him, the harder it's gonna be, because when it's early on, you're gonna have less resources. I'll admit that I tried to fight him outside the police station, which is where you first encounter him, but I couldn't finish the job. I managed to stay alive long enough to where I used all my ammo, but then that became the problem. I had nothing else to use. And no, I didn't equip the knife because frankly, I've never been confident in my knifing abilities. I will say though, the one perk about killing Nemesis early on is that he will drop special items for you. And it's not some stupid bullshit like with Mr. X where he only leaves you a couple of grenade rounds. No, if you kill Nemesis, he leaves behind parts that you could use to craft special weapons, which are awesome. Basically, the game rewards you for going the extra mile and doing more dirty work. Of course, there are points in the game where it's mandatory to fight him in order to progress the story, and those basically serve as your boss fights. And if you're the type who prefers to have more boss fights, then the solution is simple. You can just choose to fight him in all the other parts, and there you go. There's your extra boss fights. But of course, it is fair to mention that Nemesis isn't the only boss. There's also an underground worm you have to fight, known as the Gravedigger. In the cutscene, it looks like a giant uncircumcised cock. Now, Jill, I know you like them big, but do you like them that big?
No!
Oh, okay, fine. Up yours. Now, of course, you can't give a sufficient review of a Resident Evil game without at least mentioning the story. And I'm not gonna lie, this is where things start to get a little lackluster for me. While I do like the story in this game, for me personally, it's not as memorable as the storyline in Resident Evil 2. And the same goes for the characters. This game introduces Carlos, who takes on the role of the game's side character. I like him, but he's definitely not among my favorites. And the same goes for Nikolai, who basically serves as a secondary antagonist. I notice all three games have one. The first one had Albert Wesker, the second game had Chief Irons, and here we have Nikolai. And the only thing I could really say about him is he's a dick. I mean, that's all I could really say, he's just a dick. Another thing I want to mention before I forget is that this game also has quite possibly my favorite save room soundtrack in the entire series. With all that said and done, I've now played this game multiple times, and my opinion of it has not changed one iota from the time I streamed it 4 months ago. And this brings us to the final topic at hand, and it's the question that the title of this video proposes. Is this the best game in the OG trilogy? Now, before I continue, I posted a poll on my YouTube channel, and it said, which do you prefer, Resident Evil 2 or 3? And 76% voted on Resident Evil 2, and 24% voted on Resident Evil 3. Now, I want you to remember this, because by the end of this video, I'm probably going to end up pissing off 76% of you, and hopefully 24% of you are going to appreciate me more. If you watched my review of Resident Evil 2, I made a statement which I now have to back up. If you didn't see it, then cue flashback. And I admit, I only prefer the first one as a matter of personal preference. Now, as for Resident Evil 3 on the other hand, I prefer that one for the opposite reason. I think that you can make the argument that it's almost objectively better than 2. I just feel like in every way it's a superior game. I mean, should I talk about it now, or should I wait till I actually cover that one in a separate video? I think that's the way to go. Don't put fucking harp sounds on my video, okay? Seriously, knock it off. It's unacceptable behavior. If my editor is listening right now, tell him if he puts any more harp sound effects on my video, he's fired, alright? Anyways, in my last video, I said that Resident Evil 3 was objectively better than Resident Evil 2, and I also said that it was superior in almost every way. The train of thought that spawned this topic mostly had to do with the reputation of these games. Like I mentioned before, my buddy Hunter told me that this game was a poorly received financial flop, and then he urged me to stay away from it. Of course, in retrospect, I probably should have realized the fact that I was taking advice from someone who'd never even played the original trilogy, and I'm pretty sure he was only basing those things on what the voices in his head were telling him. Not to mention, he also told me that the first game I should play as my introduction to Resident Evil was the 6th game. Bottom line, he knows as much about Resident Evil as a chimpanzee knows about quantum physics. And the moral of the story here is to make your own judgments and do your own research. The myth about Resident Evil 3's quote-unquote poor reception could very easily be debunked by a quick Google search. I'm not exactly sure what perpetuates this myth, and I'm not sure who started it, but I think that the one factor that comes into play is the insane amount of praise that Resident Evil 2 gets. The praise it gets is so immense that it basically casts a shadow over the first and third game. And I think that some people immediately brush off the third game as an inferior sequel. But I've said this before, and I will say it again, Resident Evil 3 is more of an improvement over 2 than 2 is over 1. When you truly break it down and start start to analyze the situation, the only areas where Resident Evil 2 outshines the first game is mostly cosmetic. The graphics and the scenery are greatly improved, and I don't think anyone denies that Resident Evil 2 has the best story, but right now we're not talking about story, we're talking about gameplay now. And as far as the advancements with the actual gameplay are concerned, there's really not a whole lot of difference between 2 and 1. I mean, think about it. What else did they really bring to the table? You could push a zombie off into another zombie, which is pretty cool, but other than that, what else is there? I can't think of anything. Oh no, wait, that's right. You can limp too. So there you go. You could push zombies and you could limp. In 2 years, that's all they came up with. Not the fact that, hey, you know what? Maybe the player would like to walk up and down the stairs without performing a button combination every time. Not the fact that, hey, turning the character around is an unnecessarily slow and diligent process. Why don't we have an option to do it quickly? Or how about the fact that, you know, maybe the player would like to skip the cutscenes every now and then? No, none of those very simple, easy to figure out solutions dawned on them with 2 years at their disposal. And for those of you who want to jump on my case and say, oh, Dylan is just hating on Resident Evil 2, do me a favor, go back and watch my video on Resident Evil 2, alright? Because that video was basically a love letter. You could be a fan of something and give it criticism at the same time. It is possible. Now, let's look at what Resident Evil 3 brought to the table, which, by the way, took them half the amount of time to develop. You have the ability to quick turn, you can dodge and counterattack opponents, you can auto-aim, you can skip cutscenes, and you can actually walk up and down the stairs. And bear in mind, I've only scratched the surface here. I haven't even gone into the fact that it has better puzzles, better boss fights, and it offers more challenge and better gameplay variety. And probably the greatest thing about Resident Evil 3, in my opinion, and this is something I don't hear enough people talk about, is the fact that the gameplay is completely randomized. Nothing stays the same. The items you find, the enemies you encounter will often change with each playthrough, and every decision you make, no matter how small they may seem, will affect the story in a different way. What the hell is he doing here? When does this ever happen?
The zombies are getting restless.
I know. I can hear them. What's going on?
What the fuck? I've played this game more times than I could count on one hand, and every single time I played it, the experience is always different. Depending on the order you visit each area, you'll trigger different cutscenes, different interactions, and even different encounters with Nemesis. This is one of those games where I don't think it's meant to be played just once. I feel like the more times you play it, the more you start to notice and appreciate the amount of work that the developers put into it. And because of that, I know it might sound funny, but when I hear other people praise this game, I find myself rooting for it. It has kind of an underdog nature to it. Like, logically speaking, it should not be as good as it is. Especially when you consider that it was intended as a spin-off and that they had such a short time frame to develop it. And not to mention the fact that Code Veronica was intended as the true sequel. I'm actually in awe of how good Resident Evil 3 actually is. And even when you factor in that till this day, people continue to perpetuate these stupid rumors and myths about the game's reputation, it's like the odds always seem to be against it getting the respect it deserves. But for people like me, it doesn't go unnoticed. And by the way, that's not to say it's flawless. The game does have flaws. I'm just trying to think of one. Oh no, never mind. Alright, here's something that kinda irks me. Every time you die, you have to sit through this opening preview. This absolutely sucks. You do have the option to skip it using the select button, which is kinda weird, but you can't skip it right away. You have to wait approximately 5 seconds before you could skip, which is annoying. It serves no purpose, and I know it might seem like a petty complaint, but when I first played this game, this really was my least favorite thing, because every time I died, I had to deal with this. And I can't figure out the thought process behind it. Like, honestly, what goes on through your mind when you think, oh, we need to make sure the player sees this every time they die and they're not allowed to skip it until 5 seconds pass? It makes no sense to me. And I have to say, this is one thing I preferred in Resident Evil 2. Whenever you died there, the game would immediately take you back to the main menu. No time was wasted. And not to mention, another thing I picked up on is when you restarted the game in Resident Evil 2, the game highlights your previous save, which the third game does not do.
Resident Evil.
Also, speaking of when you die, I noticed that they toned down the violence of the death screen. Why bother? Even if the parents started complaining, it's like the damage was already done in the second game. You might as well just keep what already existed. And by the way, Jill, nice pose. Reminds me of Peter Griffin when he blacks out. Here's another thing I find kind of disappointing. Why is Jill no longer allowed to have a special item? In the first game, she had the lockpick, and it was reserved in a special slot that didn't take up any additional inventory space. But here, they treat the lockpick like any other item that takes up space. I know it's not the biggest issue, but I'm kind of struggling to find things to complain about in this game, and those things I mentioned are really all the complaints I have. Of course, that being said, there are complaints that other people have with this game, which I'll address, some of which I partially agree with, while some of them I find kind of ridiculous. I think that the most common complaint I've heard, and keep in mind, these aren't my words, is that the game is too short, and they say that 2 did a better job at offering the 4 modes. Now, what's really funny to me is that they're talking about something that I actually think made Resident Evil 3 better. Personally, I think people tend to overrate the whole B mode, A mode thing in Resident Evil 2. I really don't think it's as amazing as people made it out to be. By the time I finished with the last mode, I was already getting bored with it, because they basically make you play the same game 4 times in a row. And yes, I know that each mode is slightly different from one another, but let's be honest, it's not that different. I mean, let's take off the rose-colored glasses. It's all the same shit. For the most part, you're exploring the exact same areas and solving the same puzzles. There's really not that much variety between the modes. There's not. They're just giving you the illusion that it's more than it actually is by changing a few character interactions and then making you constantly switch back and forth between 2 discs. And like I said, by the time I finished the final B mode, I was already getting burned out from it, because at that point I was just going through the motions. And for what? So I can experience a few different cutscenes and the fact that I could just run past Mr. X as 2 different characters? I mean, again, I think that people just tend to overrate that whole thing. I mean, in 1998, I'm sure it was a revolutionary concept that blew people away, but in 2026, I really don't think it held up that well. And I'll tell you something else, if you take Resident Evil 3 and play that game 4 times in a row with different tactics and decisions, I think that you'll find that with each playthrough it's different and it offers more gameplay variety than both A modes and B modes in Resident Evil 2. Not to mention, it's all on one disc. Again, I think that the only thing that the B modes and A modes accomplished was giving the player the illusion that they were getting more bang for their buck than they actually were. And Resident Evil 3 didn't bother with that. And I think that's why so many people brush it off and treat it like it was a half-assed rush job. And as far as the statement goes that the game is too short, I didn't think it was too short at all. I thought it had the appropriate length. While this might not be the longest game, it certainly is a big game. There are plenty of areas you end up exploring, which is something I like about this game. I know I keep using the word variety to describe things in this game, but the word variety really is a fitting keyword that sums up many aspects about this game. You're constantly on the move, and you're not stuck exploring the same area all throughout the entire game. When I first played this game, I found myself being disappointed when I arrived at the precinct from the second game. I immediately started jumping to conclusions and made the assumption that the game developers were just being lazy and just rehashing the same location from a previous game because they didn't want to be bothered designing new areas. Well, that preconceived notion was immediately proven wrong once I realized how big the rest of the game was. And for the record, the part where you visit the police station is extremely short, and you never have to actually explore it a second time. In all honesty, I think that if you remove this part from the game, it would actually make very little difference. And rather than call it lazy programming, I think of it more as a fan service, doing a little callback to the second game. Another thing that people love to complain about is the fact that Jill is the only main character and that you don't get to play the entire game over as a second main character. Well, me personally, I had no problem with them going this route. The pacing of the game felt fine to me. And there is a section where Jill's infected by the virus and you have to play as Carlos to explore a nearby hospital to craft an antidote for her. Again, it's another way that the game offered variety, and I enjoyed it. But you know what? Even if the developers added a second mode with a different character, I can almost guarantee that these same people wouldn't be satisfied and that they'd find something else to bitch and complain about. And that brings me to the final complaint that I've heard people make, which is about the dodging mechanics. The dodging mechanics seem to be hit and miss for some people. I do think that some can adapt better than others, and I myself don't mind them, but I could sort of see why some people tend to struggle. The consensus for them seems to be that the dodging mechanics do work, but they can also be unpredictable. A lot of it has to do with the timing. and trying to gauge the proper timing can be a little tricky. Believe it or not, the best piece of advice I could give is to not think too much about it and just let it happen naturally. In order to perform a successful dodge, you have to press the aiming button, which is either R1 or R2. And another way you can dodge is to hold R1 or R2 and press the action button, which is also how you shoot. So in other words, you're basically going to be hitting these buttons anyway, whether you intend to dodge or not. What it really boils down to is how you time it. Is it a perfect system? No, but it's still a better system than anything that Resident Evil 2 had to offer. And I'll show you an example. Here you have a zombie gnawing on my neck, and right behind me you see a stampede of zombies approaching me from behind. Now, if this was Resident Evil 2, the minute that one zombie lets go of me, the zombies from behind will immediately grab and kill me. But in Resident Evil 3, watch what happens. The only parts where the dodging mechanics get frustrating for me is when you fight Nemesis. I don't know what it is, but I feel like this was a situation where the game developers tried to make it too realistic. And what I mean by that is that there are certain circumstances where you'll take a hit even if you perform the dodge correctly. If you're too close to a wall, for example, that wall will block you, and therefore it doesn't matter if you perform the dodge correctly. You won't have enough space from Nemesis to move away from him, and he'll still grab you. I feel like in most other games, things like that are inconsequential. Also, I'm almost positive that there are certain ways that Nemesis attacks you which are completely unavoidable. After spending some time analyzing his pattern, the conclusion I've drawn is that there are two ways he tries to grab you. One is to throw you, and the other is to impale you. If he grabs you to throw you, you can easily dodge it, and even if he does throw you, it doesn't do that much damage. However, if he grabs you to impale you, I'm almost certain that you cannot dodge it, regardless of how perfect your timing is. There's also an additional mechanic that helps you get out of trouble, but it requires you to rapidly mash buttons. Even I'll admit that that's pretty friggin' annoying. I mean, great, whatever. I mean, listen, I don't think anyone's denying that this game has flaws, but the topic here isn't about whether or not this game has flaws. The topic is whether or not it's better than Resident Evil 2, and quite frankly, it is better than Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 may have the better story and more memorable characters, but Resident Evil 3 is still a better game. Why is Resident Evil 3 a better game? Simple. First, it has better mechanics. The quick 180-degree turn and the dodging gives you more control and freedom to utilize your reflexes, and you're not completely restricted by the stiff controls as you were in the other games. Number 2, the game has better puzzles. Unlike the second game, Resident Evil 3 is loaded with some fun brain teasers that are challenging but at the same time don't overwhelm you. And some of these puzzles really stood out to me. For example, I love the part where you fix the music box so it's properly in tune. I also like the puzzle where you have to find the password, and in order to find the password, you have to look for it by watching an advertisement on a VHS recording. And like most of the other things in this game, this puzzle is randomized. In other words, if you die on this part, the advertisement on the VHS recording changes. And again, I like this because it doesn't allow the player to get too comfortable. And you're not just going through the motions like with Resident Evil 2, where all 4 modes you constantly have to enter 2236 to open the safe. And the third reason that Resident Evil 3 is better is because it has better boss fights. In Resident Evil 2, you had William Birkin, his offspring, and Mr. X. And with every one of them, the strategy remained the same. And I use the word strategy loosely because there really is no strategy. It boils down to you shooting the shit out of them until they die, while also having enough mixed herbs and first aid sprays to keep yourself from dying. In Resident Evil 3, on the other hand, you've got Nemesis and the Gravedigger, which might not seem like a lot, but what this game lacks in quantity, it makes up for with quality. With these guys, you're not just shooting them until they die, you're meant to identify their pattern, which is the way a boss fight is supposed to operate. And this game gives you the perfect opportunity to dodge their attacks and look for weaknesses to exploit. Again, that's how a boss fight is supposed to work. And when you fight Nemesis and start to identify his movements and patterns, you sort of get into a rhythm where you become better at handling him, and then you can think of proper strategies. Now let's compare him to Mr. X, and I'm sorry, but Mr. X was a complete joke. He moved like he was underwater, and I'm pretty sure that Stephen Hawking could win a race against him using his electric wheelchair alone. And losing a fight against Mr. X is almost impossible, because he moves so slow it gives you enough time to distance yourself and kill him. And if you get too close, then all he does is punch you in the face, which doesn't even do that much damage, and it doesn't even knock you down. And by the time he prepares his next move, you're already able to run away. And if you exit the area, you've already escaped him. Now let's compare that to Nemesis. The difference is night and day. He will continue to chase you from door to door, and as I said before, he will catch up with you. The purpose behind Nemesis is to scare you and challenge you, and he succeeds in doing both. And the fourth reason that Resident Evil 3 is better, and this kind of goes hand in hand with everything else I've been saying, is that it has more challenge to it. I don't think anyone denies that it's harder than Resident Evil 2. And the fifth and final reason why Resident Evil 3 is better than Resident Evil 2 is because it has better variety to it. The fact that this game is randomized, and the fact that this game gives you the opportunity to make all these different decisions that affect every outcome gives it more replay value. And the same goes for the fact that you could use gunpowder to craft different types of ammo. There's more than one way you could approach the situation depending on what you want your strategy to be. And again, once you've completed the game using one method, you might want to play it again using a different method. For example, I like to stock up on as much gunpowder as possible so I could craft a bunch of Magnum revolver ammo. However, you might be the type who'd rather continuously craft shotgun and handgun ammo, in which case the game also rewards you by giving you the option to craft upgraded ammo that does more damage. To cut to the chase, do I think that this is the best game in the trilogy? Honestly, I think that it might as well be, and I will admit that I still prefer the first game as a matter of personal preference, and I do think that it did better as a horror game, whereas 3 was more like straight up action. But when it comes to gameplay and replay value, I'd say that 3 is an all-time classic. As someone who played this game for the first time 27 years after it came out with no preconceived notion, I had a lot of fun with this game, and in my opinion, it gets better and better with each playthrough. It's a fun, challenging, but rewarding experience, and by the time those end credits scroll and you hear that peaceful dulcimer music, it gives you a nice feeling that allows you to reflect on all the hard work you put into this game. And the fact that so many movies and TV shows in the late 90s were stylized like this, I feel like it helps make this serve as a time capsule. To be honest, I don't think there's a more fitting way to seal the lid of this era of Resident Evil.